welcome to The Kill File, your favorite true crime podcast. I'm your host, Brittany, and each week we will explore the dark corners of true crime, unsolved mysteries, and murder. Join me as we uncover secrets, investigate evidence, and dive into the chilling details of some of the most fascinating cases. Get ready for a journey into the dark unknown, because in The Kill File, nothing stays buried forever. Hey guys, welcome to episode 12 of The Kill File. I am so glad you're here. A little business to shout out before we get started with the episode. I wanted to say real quick that the merch website is up and running, and we are continuing to add more merchandise every week. I will also be doing merch giveaways at some point, so stay tuned for that, and maybe check out the products and see what you would want as a giveaway. Some of the t-shirts on there are fantastic, and they're witty. So also, in the future, I will be doing discount codes or whatever for our merch so you can get the stuff that you love at a discount. So the website for you to shop is thekillfile.printify.me/products. Or you can just go to the website and you can just click the shop button. So go check it out. And that is all the business that I have for you. This week, we are going to cover a case that was requested by my best friend in the whole wide world, who grew up near this area and remembered this case from when she was younger. So shout out to my bestie for the recommendation. I love you so much. And I'm looking forward to sharing with you guys what I was able to find on this case. And let me tell you, I was able to find a lot of research on this case. Today, we're going to cover the abduction of Jacob Wetterling. Trigger warnings for today are going to be brief descriptions of child molestation, child murder, sexual assault on minors, child abduction, and assault. I don't really go into exactly what happened with any of the sexual assault, so it won't be as heavy as other episodes. It will be brief. This whole story was a mystery and unsolved for 27 years. Let me say that again. 27 years. Can you imagine? Not knowing what happened to your loved one, or specifically your child, for 27 years. Ugh, the heartbreak. On the night of Jacob's abduction, the parents of Jacob, named Jerry and Patty Wetterling, left their home to attend a dinner party that was not far from their home. They left Jacob in charge of watching his two younger siblings, who was Trevor, he was 10 years old, and Carmen, who was 8 years old. Also, a friend of Jacob's named Aaron Larson, who was said to be 11 years old, joined the group in staying home as the parents left. Trevor apparently was the first kid to call their parents to ask permission if the boys could ride to the Tom Thumb convenience store. That would be about a 10-minute bike ride away, so the boys could rent a movie and get some snacks for the evening. They were said to not have school the next day due to teacher conferences, so they had hope that their mother would allow them to go. However, Patty Wetterling said no, as she was afraid that the drivers in the area would not be able to see the boys on their bikes. One of them actually was on a scooter, while they would have to ride down what was said to be a stretch of country road that was extremely dark. After this, the boys came up with a plan, and Jacob then called his father. The plan was for Trevor to carry a flashlight, and Aaron would wear a white t-shirt, and Jacob would wear what was said to be his father's orange reflective vest that he used for jogging. They also planned for their 14-year-old neighbor to stay with Carmen and babysit while they ran to the store. Jerry Wetterling seemed to think that this was a good enough plan and had actually felt bad for Jacob on that particular day because Jacob had not done so great with his skating skills as he had tried out for the hockey team. Jerry thought that if the boys could go and rent a movie that was said to be called Naked Gun, that maybe it would lift Jacob's spirits a bit, and this is when Jerry decided to give his permission for the boys to bike on a scooter down to the store. This was actually the very first time that the boys had ever been given permission to ride their bikes after dark. On Sunday, October 22nd, 1989, Jacob Wetterling was abducted while riding his bicycle on the way home from the Tom Thumb convenience store. They had been riding back, and during the time where they came upon the long stretch of country road that was dark is when things would take a turn for the worst. It was said that a man came up to them, pointed a gun at them, and told them to turn off their flashlights. This masked man then made the boys get off their bikes and lay face down on the ground, which they did. After the masked man asked the boys each their ages, he kept Jacob behind and told the other boys to run away and to not look back or he would shoot them. Oh my God, can you imagine the fear? The guilt of leaving your brother or your friend behind as you run for your life? But what could you even do at that point? These poor boys, I can't even imagine. Jacob was then handcuffed and put into the masked man's car. It was said at one point the other two boys got far enough away and they looked back and the man and Jacob were gone. When Trevor and Aaron made it home, they notified the neighbor who was watching Carmen while they had ran to the store. This neighbor girl called Jacob's father first and then immediately called the police. Can you imagine being Jacob's father getting this phone call after just giving your kids permission to ride their bikes for the first time after dark, even though their mother had already said no and that it wasn't a good idea? I can't even imagine the gut punch he must have taken or the guilt that he would have had to have had. What they would not know for the next 27 years is who took Jacob and what happened to him until one day in September of 2016. So I'm going to preface this story with a few facts to keep in mind during the timeline and explanations of the investigation. First off, I want to let you know that the person who abducted Jacob is a man named Danny Heinrich, and this is the story of Jacob's abduction and the nearly 3-decade investigation that followed. Secondly, Jacob's mother, Patty Wetterling, along with a co-author and blogger, Joy Baker, wrote a book about her experience regarding Jacob's abduction and what she went through. It's called Dear Jacob, A Mother's Journey of Hope. Jacob was abducted in St. Joseph, Minnesota, which is a smaller town about 75 miles northwest of Minneapolis and at the time had roughly 6,500 residents. The search for Jacob began within minutes of his abduction. The search and investigation as to what happened to Jacob would launch one of the biggest searcheries and investigation in Minnesota's history. As I mentioned before, Jacob was taken on Sunday, October 22nd, 1989, and by the next day, the FBI was already involved in the search for Jacob. Monday, October 23rd, 1989, the FBI and other agencies joined the investigation. There were tips pouring in, and investigators were able to find tire and shoe tracks that they believed could be important. There were officers and volunteers alike that conducted searches, and this included aerial searches as well. The Stearns County Sheriff, Charlie Graft, says there was a lack of evidence. They did find a few clues at the abduction site, like adult and child-sized footprints, as well as some tire tracks. The Wetterlings then got together with friends and family and made a decision to seek as much publicity as possible for this case and their search. Tuesday, October 24th, 1989, there was an FBI expert in psychology profiles, and this person joined the case. So this is just 2 days after Jacob's disappearance. The profiler stated that the person who abducted Jacob was most, quote, likely a white loner with a physical deformity who committed a similar crime in the past, end quote. That shit blows my mind. How do they know this stuff? Like, they are usually spot on. This is also the day that Patty Wetterling speaks in her book. She said, quote, "It was a Tuesday. He was kidnapped on Sunday night. I was sleep deprived and I was a little defeated. I thought they would find Jacob really quickly and we could heal. And I crawled in bed and really was trying to sleep. But I pulled the covers over my head and decided I'm never going to leave this bed. It's just too hard." End quote. Wednesday, October 25th, 1989, there was a vigil of over 500 people who came to the St. Joseph Church. Not long after Jacob's abduction, authorities learned about an incident that happened about 9 months prior with a young boy named Jared Shearl, sorry if I butchered that, who was said to be abducted by a man while he was walking home from a store in Cold Springs, Minnesota. It was said that a man grabbed Jared off his bike and, trigger warning, groped him, leaving behind a baseball cap that would later be used as evidence and tested for DNA. The man put Jared in the back of his car, drove him to a remote location, and then, trigger warning, sexually assaulted him. The sheriff at the time, Graft, said that the investigators were sure that Jacob's abduction indeed involved a sex offender. They also believed that the offender may have left the area and that could suggest that Jacob would be dead. Again, this was just conjecture. Can you imagine hearing this about your own son? Jared said the man who took him was wearing camouflage fatigues and also had a police scanner in his car. Jared also states that the man had a luggage rack on his vehicle. It said at the time that the authorities found out about Jared. He also stated that the man who dropped him off after he had assaulted him told him to run and not look back, or he would shoot. Sound familiar? Ugh. Thursday, October 26, 1989, there was a national broadcast on an old TV show called A Current Affair, which spoke of the abduction, and this helped with tips coming in from around the country. The business leaders in St. Paul offered a $100,000 reward for Jacob's safe return home. This is also the time that the authorities started searching for Jacob on horseback. FBI tells the public that there are 20 agents that are assigned to this case. The governor at the time, who was Rudy Perpick, met with the National Guard, state officials, Graft, and the family of Jacob Wetterling. It seemed like people were really rallying behind the thought that Jacob was just missing at this point and not dead, and they were actively trying to find him. Friday, October 27th, 1989, this is when Governor Perpick says that he is going to activate the National Guard and the State Patrol Department of National Resources to search a 700 square mile area for Jacob. This is just such a huge reaction to this little boy being taken, and I am here for it. It makes me so sad that even with all this publicity that he couldn't be located. Also, can you imagine being his brother or their friend and always worried that this man would come back and take or kill you? I just want to know, how do you get back to normal life after something like this? Like, obviously you probably never do, but at what point are you able to function again? It just blows my mind, the strength of people. Patty said in her book, quote, I had this really visual experience of seeing Jacob curled up in a ball somewhere saying the same thing. They're never going to find me. I just began talking to him. This is kind of where the letters came from. I just said, hold on, Jacob, we'll find you. You just have to be strong. And at that point, I made the decision to get out of bed. Some days, that was all I could do, was just get out of bed. End quote. November 1st, 1989, the FBI had to disparage a rumor and some false reports that Jacob had been found safe because he had not. During this same time, a foundation had begun a mailing campaign that was nationwide that notified hospitals, social agencies, truck stops, etc. about his abduction. 1 million flyers were actually sent around the country. November 4th and 5th of 1989, the Minnesota Twins baseball players and officials showed support, and there was a banner displayed at a Vikings and Rams football game, which I thought was super cool of them. November 6th, 1989, a sketch of the man that had been seen in the Tom Thumb convenience store the same night of the abduction, as witnesses came forward claiming that they saw a quote-unquote unusual man that was said to be in his 50s, had been seen there and another store earlier that day. Investigators say that they had exhausted all other means of finding this man. His description was he was glaring at customers and was a white male in his 50s and weighed around 200 pounds with white hair and was said to be about 6 foot tall. An alert was issued with this sketch to no avail. On November 8th, 1989, the Minnesota Timberwolves basketball team, when starting their season, donated the proceeds from 5,400 tickets from their first home game to aid in the search for Jacob. On November 9th, the Wetterlings went on the Geraldo show for an interview. November 12th, this is just 2 weeks after the abduction of Jacob, there was an older man who walked into the exact same store, the Tom Thumb, which, by the way, before this story, I had never heard of that store in my life. What a name for a store. The clerk at the store said that the man was acting strangely, and he was said to have bought saltine crackers with some chicken noodle soup. I don't know why that's important, but it was in the report. Now, one of the reasons that this man was going to be suspected was because he made some offhand comment with a chuckle about Jacob's abduction, saying, quote, I don't think they're ever going to find that boy. I mean, I can understand if you were the clerk why that would feel weird, but at the same time, like, people are going to have opinions about a case this big, especially if it's plastered all over the news and media. I mean, in hindsight, the man probably shouldn't have said anything. It said the clerk didn't have a license plate for the authorities, but she did work with police to make a sketch of the man's face. The authorities released this sketch along with another one at the same time of a man who allegedly may have tried to abduct a different boy in New Brighton, which was said to be a suburb of Minneapolis. Both of these sketches were matches to the earlier sketch of the man that was seen lurking outside of the Tom Thumb store on the same night that Jacob was abducted. Okay, so December 13th, and this is the same year, 1989, Jared, the 12-year-old, was able to meet with authorities and gave them detailed descriptions of what the suspect looked like, his clothing, and also the suspect's voice. Jared also met with the FBI to create a sketch of the man who had assaulted him. Investigators are now thinking that the two cases were related. During this part of my research, I read this article all about how they did these sketches for Jacob's case and how sketch artists are a dying breed. It was really interesting to see the different sketches they came up with and how some of the features were the same and not all of them. And then at one point, they actually combined all three sketches and made another sketch. And this was said to be one that was eerily similar to Danny Heinrich's real look. They talked about how they tried to get people describing to focus on one feature at a time. And when one particular sketch artist does his work, he says that he has to be careful not to lead them, tells them not to be prejudiced against the rest of the face if one feature stands out, and tells them to focus like on the width of the nose or something similar. So at the end of this article, they showed a picture of a man, and then on each side was two different sketches of him. They stated that the man was actually not a criminal, but they had these people do the sketches from memory, like people explained it to the sketch artist, and both of them looked so different. They have like the same nose, but the other features are definitely different. And this was kind of to drive home the point that sketches are not photographs. So people may get too hung up on the pictures as a whole and not report someone. Under the two sketches of the man, and it actually had his actual picture in between them, it asked if you saw something or would you say something, and then it asked you to vote. I don't think that I could have confidently called on either one of those sketches in relation to the real man. So it's super interesting to see how different they look and yet eerily the same. I'm going to post that pic later in the week when this episode comes out. I'll also link the article if you're interested to see it. It's just super fascinating to me. So December 16th, 1989, this is when the FBI agents would interview Danny Heinrich, who was a resident of Paynesville, which was 30 miles from St. Joseph. He denied any knowledge about the abductions of Jacob or Jared. It was said that Heinrich was identified as a suspect in Jared's case. However, when they checked his vehicle just a few days after Jared had been kidnapped, they saw that Heinrich's vehicle didn't have a luggage rack. However, he did often wear military fatigues and was also a member of the National Guard, which is terrifying. It also made me wonder if the fact that his car didn't have a luggage rack was because they had maybe put that out in the press or the media, and so he took it off. I'm not 100% on that. That's just conjecture, but I could see him doing that if he's a suspect. I tried to figure out how he became a suspect in the first place, and I went down a huge rabbit hole looking for this, but I could not figure out what led them to him in the first place. We know now that this is indeed the man who molested Jacob and Jared, but I wanted to know why he was a suspect in the first place. I did find that Heinrich told authorities he couldn't remember where he was on the days of both of the kidnappings. He told authorities he was living in Paynesville until November of 1989 when he moved into his father's house. On January 8th of 1990, Paynesville Police Chief tells the investigators on the Wetterling case that his own town had a year of different molestation cases. The chief of police, Robert Schmiginski, awesome name, thinks that Danny Heinrich needs to be considered as a suspect in those cases. There had been several incidents of a male that had been reported in Paynesville for groping or chasing juvenile young men from September of 1986 to the next September, but no arrests were made. Ugh, that's so frustrating. Like, what in the actual hell? January 12th, 1990, investigators interviewed Danny Heinrich again. Heinrich provided authorities with his tennis shoes and some samples of his body hair to be tested later for DNA. January 16th, 1990, the investigators on the case were able to get access to the car that Heinrich owned at the time of the attacks, which was a 1987 Mercury Topaz that had been repossessed just 2 months after Jared had been abducted. They then took Jared and had him sit in the car. They asked him on a scale of 1 to 10 how closely this car resembled the car that he was abducted in a year earlier, and Jared said it was an 8 or a 9. January 26, 1990, the police do a lineup with 6 white males, and one of them is Danny Heinrich. When Jared tries to identify the man who assaulted him, keep in mind this was an entire year later, he was unable to identify him. He does, however, say that one of the men in the lineup is actually a 7 on a scale of 1 to 10 as the man who abducted him, but he unfortunately said Danny Heinrich is a 4 on that scale. On January 24th, 1990, authorities search a property in Painesville, a house that had belonged to Heinrich's father, and this is where Heinrich had been living since November of 1989. They were looking for Jacob or his clothing, maybe a gun, any documents, or anything else that could connect him to Jacob. They do find 2 police scanners, lists of scanner frequencies, a pair of boots, clothing, and a carrying case. While this was taking place, Heinrich tells the authorities that he was most likely at home on the day that Jacob was abducted and that he was not in St. Joseph that weekend. Then investigators find something of a trunk inside of the home, and it contained pictures of children. One picture was in just underwear, and another of the pictures showed a child with a towel wrapped around him. It was then said that Heinrich had objected to the police officers seizing those pictures because the officers felt like these were just not right. But Heinrich would later tell the investigators that he burned those pictures. January 26, 1990, the FBI tells the investigators that the tire marks from Heinrich's vehicle were consistent but not an exact match of the tires tracks found from Jacob's abduction. This would later be explained as to why they were not an exact match. February 9th, 1990, the FBI was able to confidently tell investigators a fiber that had been found on Jared's clothing had a very similar, quote, microscopic and optical properties as fibers taken from the Mercury Topaz that Heinrich owned in January of 1989, end quote. February 9th, Heinrich was arrested on probable cause in connection of the Jared abduction and the sexual assault that followed. Heinrich continued to deny any involvement and even went on to say that he was being framed. He lawyered up and refused to talk. He was then later released without actually being charged with anything, which is so frustrating because they fucking had him. February 19th, 1990, there was about 200 people who gathered to mark the day of Jacob's birthday, and they officially launched what would be known as the Jacob Wetterling Foundation that would focus on prevention and the elimination of abductions of children by strangers. At the time of the launch, there was said to be $200,000 raised. April 13th, 1990, FBI tell investigators that the shoe print that they had found at the scene had quote-unquote corresponded to the right shoe of Heinrich, but there wasn't enough detail so that the lab examiner couldn't determine if it was indeed Heinrich's shoe conclusively. On May 24th, 1991, so this is about a year later now, there was a U.S. Senator named Dave Durenberger that proposed a national registry of offenders who had committed crimes against children. This would be known as the Jacob Wetterling Act. I love how hard the community and his family fought for things to happen, and they went on to do so many wonderful things in the name of their son or in the name of the boy from their community. So September 13th, 1994, so a few years later at this point, this is when Congress would pass the Jacob Wetterling Crimes Against Children and Sexually Violent Offender Registration Act and Child Safety Act. This would be just a part of a larger bill for violent crimes that would require a person who was convicted of a criminal offense against a minor or a person who was convicted of a sexually violent felony to have to register with police for 10 years after they were released from prison, probation, or parole. It was not required at this time, although it would be later required, but it was permitted at the time for the police to tell the community where these offenders lived if they wanted to. In 1996, Amber Alerts were created as a national broadcast system that would help inform the public of cases of potentially abducted children and help get the word out quicker. In August of 1997, there is an enhanced photo of what Jacob would look like if he were the age of 19, and this was sent to 73 million people in the U.S. So they're still fighting the good fight. In October of 2003, so years later, there was a person named Kevin that spoke with investigators and tells them that he had actually driven through the Wetterling crime scene out of curiosity after he had heard about the reports and about the search for Jacob over the police scanner. They didn't consider this man a suspect, and because of this, the investigation now shifted their focus to the fact that the suspect could have been on foot. I don't understand this, though. Like, what happened that would make the investigation shift their focus? This does, however, explain why the tire marks from Heinrich's vehicle were not an exact match, because this man drove through the crime scene. I wish that he would have came forward a long time ago, letting the investigators know this. So in 2004, this is the year that I graduated high school, the authorities were trying to get a neighbor of Jacob named Dan Rassier to admit to the abduction of Jacob. Rassier's driveway was near the abduction site where the police were able to find the tracks and shoe prints. Rassier, I hope I'm saying his name right, Rassier, could be Rassier, I don't know, told the authorities that he had seen a car turn around quickly in the driveway the night Jacob was abducted, and he was convinced that the vehicle that had turned around was connected to the kidnapping. It then said that 14 years later, there would be a man who came forward and claimed to be the driver of that vehicle, which then pointed the authorities to Rassier. In July of 2010, the investigation leads authorities to search Rassier's property and home where his parents lived, which was said to be a farm, and they even dug up sections of the property as they had Rassier as a person of interest. A few months later, the authorities would announce that there wasn't any evidence found on or in any of the material that was taken from Rassier's property. In July of 2012, the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension had gotten a DNA profile from the sweatshirt that was worn by Jared on the day of his abduction, and the DNA showed that there was at least 2 sets of DNA on the wrist of the sweatshirt. They were not able to rule Jared out as one of those DNA matches, but the predominant male DNA profile was not a match for Jared's DNA. The BCA, which was the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, was then able to say that 99.5% of the general population could be ruled out. On July 10th of 2015, the Minnesota BCA had reported that the male DNA profile that was found on the wrist of Jared's sweatshirt was a match for the body hair samples that were actually taken from Danny Heinrich back in 1990. We are now 25 years out from the abduction of Jacob. On July 28th, 2015, authorities searched Danny Heinrich's small one-bedroom home that had been owned by his father. They were looking for any type of evidence that could connect him to either Jacob or Jared. The authorities seized 19, I'm going to say that again, 19 3-ring binders full of child pornography, duct tape, a pair of silver handcuffs, a camouflage shirt and pair of pants, and there was also 4 bins that were filled with boys-sized athletic clothing. The prosecutors are saying that Heinrich was making pornography of his own by using copies of a yearbook of Painesville from the 1970s, which is fucking weird. Authorities also found, oh, this is awful, several videotapes of what looks like footage of children in the neighborhood that were delivering newspapers or riding their bikes, playing on the playgrounds, or during sports. Oh my fuck, are you kidding me? This is absolutely terrifying. And also, what a sick freak! Holy shit, to think this nut job was just sitting there like a fucking full-on creep, just videotaping random children doing normal children things? Oh, the sick fuck. I want to stab his eyeballs out so he can't enjoy looking at anything anymore. It's just disgusting. In October of 2015, it looks like there was a criminal complaint against Heinrich that was sealed by a special agent in the presence of a judge. This is only conjecture here, but I am guessing that the complaint was sealed to either protect a minor or possibly the person who filed the complaint so Heinrich couldn't find out who complained, or something of the sort, probably because of the nature of the complaint. I am super curious what it says, though. Not who it was, because I understand and I want to respect their privacy, but I'm just curious what that sick turd did. So, on August 31st in 2016, Heinrich's attorneys agreed to a deal for Heinrich in which he will be charged only with the pornography charge and not the kidnapping or murder of Jacob Wetterling. And in return, Heinrich showed the investigators where he had buried Jacob's body. The burial site of Jacob was on a farm that was just outside of Painesville and not far from where Heinrich had lived at the time. And it was about 30 miles from the St. Joseph area. It was at this time the Wetterlings realized their son was actually deceased. Up until this time, they still believed that he was alive somewhere, which is heartbreaking. It said that both the state and federal investigators on this case talked to the Wetterlings at this time, and they had to tell these poor parents that the statute of limitations did not allow the authorities to charge Heinrich with Jacob's sexual assault or kidnapping. And unfortunately, they did not have enough evidence to prove that he had murdered Jacob. The authorities stated that, quote, "Our goal was proof, answers, and accountability. He would not plead guilty to a murder that we could not prove. Jacob would not have been found," end quote. It was said that both Jerry and Patty Wetterling had agreed to show their support for the deal, but that it would still take almost an entire year for Heinrich to agree to it. Why? Does he not realize that this is the deal of the fucking century? They could have just put him away for life on child pornography charges. Ugh. I did read in one article that the Stearns County Sheriff, Don Gunmanson, said, quote, "All of us failed," as he spent over an hour describing to reporters all of the missed opportunities and failures of the investigation and where pieces could have been put together to put Heinrich behind bars a lot sooner. I am glad that they took responsibility for their actions, though. I love to see that. You don't always see that, especially when it comes to the authorities, so good for them. Heinrich was also the man who had sexually assaulted several boys in the Painesville area and the Cold Springs area. On September 6th, in 2016, Heinrich confesses, although he is not convicted, of the abduction, assault, and murder of Jacob Wetterling. He also talked to the fact that he'd actually buried Jacob. He also confessed to the assault of Jared that happened in the spring of 1989. While he was confessing to the murder of Jacob, he spoke the truth that Patty Wetterling had been waiting for almost 3 decades. He stated that he handcuffed Jacob behind his back, and then as he was putting him in the car, Jacob asked, quote, "What did I do wrong?" End quote. Oh my God, I cried when I read this, like actually cried. Ugh, this made my heart hurt so badly. This poor child. I can't even imagine what he must have felt going through this, or what his parents felt when this was happening. Heinrich told courts that Jacob started crying when Heinrich told him that he couldn't take him all the way home. Then Heinrich was said to have stated he, trigger warning, sexually assaulted Jacob, but that he panicked when he heard a police siren, and this is when he loaded his revolver and shot Jacob and then buried his body. Then the authorities dug the area and uncovered a small piece of what looked to be the jacket that Jacob was wearing the day that he had gone missing. It was said to be a red St. Cloud hockey jacket. Within the next 2 days, the authorities were able to locate bones, teeth, and a t-shirt that had the name Wetterling on it. Heinrich was quoted saying, quote, "I was driving on a dead-end road. I noticed 3 children on their bicycles with a flashlight. I pulled into a driveway, passed, after they passed me, turned around, faced the direction of the road they would be coming back on. Approximately 20 minutes or so later, they came back. I stepped out of my car, I put a mask on, I reached for my revolver. I proceeded onto the road. Oh, the sick fucker. So he saw them going to the convenience store for their movie and snacks on their bikes, and he knew that they would have to come back by him. So he sat there and waited? I am horrified by this. Heinrich then said that he, trigger warning, sexually assaulted and then executed Jacob near a grove of trees. He then said he buried Jacob's body the best that he was able to. Heinrich went on to say that about a year later, he went back and transferred Jacob's remains to farmland back in Painesville, which is where he showed investigators when it was part of his plea deal. The only reason that this sick fuck got away with this for so long is because DNA technology had to catch up. It makes me sick. This is clearly premeditated abduction, and I cannot believe that he won't serve a day for it. A U.S. attorney that was on this case named Andrew Lugar said about Danny Heinrich that on this day he had wished that they could have been able to get different results than what they had got, but did say that people who worked this case did deliver what they could, which was the truth. He stated that Heinrich had murdered a young boy and that today he was going to face justice. One of the things that stuck out in court was when Lugar stated the quote-unquote unthinkable things that Heinrich admitted to should make everyone angry. He further stated that there would be many times of wondering why this happened and that there would be no good answer to that question. Heinrich was sentenced to the deal that he made, which was 20 years in prison for the possession of child pornography. In exchange, the authorities had dropped the other counts of child pornography that would have carried a potential life sentence. And they also agreed not to charge him with murder. Holy shit, did he get the deal of a lifetime, and this piece of shit should have been put down. I hope that justice is served in some form or another while he's in prison. That's all I'm going to say. Lugar described Heinrich as, quote, volatile and unpredictable man who would want to talk 1 minute and then clam up. Patty Wetterling had stated to the fact that it was so painful for them to find out this information and that until they found this out from Heinrich, to them, Jacob was still alive. Patty and Jerry Wetterling were searching for their son for 27 years of their own lives to find out that Jacob had actually been murdered within just hours of being abducted. Ugh, the heartache. This poor mom, thinking that her son was still alive, because they never found his body or anything pointing towards Jacob not being alive. The decades of wondering what your son would look like, if he was alive or not, what he would be doing with his life, etc. I can imagine that the healing process of this, of actually losing your son, wouldn't even begin until you found out that he was no longer on this earth. One source said that she had seemed content with the deal that Heinrich was given, even though he would not be charged with Jacob's death, because it was the only evidence that they had of the crime. I can only imagine this poor mother just wanted to know what happened to her son. My heart and love goes out to the Wetterling family, and I hope that they were able to find some sort of peace in finally knowing, and I hope for their sakes that they are able to find some sort of happiness in this lifetime, because they deserve that and so much more. I think it's absolutely badass that Patty went on to do wonderful things that she has done for other children and for their families that have suffered something similar. Patty Wetterling dedicated her entire existence to trying to find Jacob and trying to fight the good fight for children like Jacob. The Minnesota Historical Society accounted that Patty has served on the board of directors for something called the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and she also co-founded Team Hope, which is the organization's support group for people with missing children. One of Patty's biggest accomplishments was her successful campaign for the Jacob Wetterling Crimes Act Against Children and Sexually Violent Offender Registration Act, and this was something that was passed in 1994. This instituted the first statewide sex offender registry. In an interview that I read that had just come out in October of last year, so 2023, Patty Wetterling spoke about the book she had written. I have not read this myself, as I had found this towards the end of my research, but it actually stated that it was basically a play-by-play of what happened when it came to Jacob's investigation and how she felt in the end. She said that it was basically herself, a blogger named Joy Baker, and the little boy who was also abducted but was not killed by Heinrich, named Jared, who were able to put the pieces together that ended up solving the case that had been haunting this community for the past 3 decades. If any of my listeners have read this book, I'm curious if you liked the book and how it was to read. I'm not sure that I could read a book like this, being a mother of boys, but I think it's awesome that she did it. She said in 2010, Joy Baker, who had been working at a hospital at that time, had started a blog about the case. She was able to research and help with the uncovering of some unsolved sexual assaults that had happened back in the 1980s in Paynesville, Minnesota. It was also stated that further down the line, towards 2013 and 2014, Baker and Jared were helping the authorities connect the dots that helped them connect Jared's case to Jacob's case. In the book, it talks about how the pressure that was from the parents of Jacob, both Jerry and Patty, relentlessly pressuring the authorities is the only reason that Jacob's case was even reopened. Jerry Wetterling said that Patty turned into a quote-unquote bulldog and that she worked very hard to keep other kids safe. I love this. So I'm going to wrap this case up with a quote from Patty Wetterling's co-author, Joy Baker. She said, quote, "From the very beginning, I told her, Patty, there are other mothers who have lost their children, and there are other mothers who have missing children. But there's no one like you who has gone on and changed laws and caught the attention of Congress and the president and spoke and made such a huge difference," end quote. I did actually see a picture during my research that Patty met President Bill Clinton when she was helping with Megan's Law, which is pretty cool. I can't even tell you what it means to see a mother and father go the distance for their child like this. I think a lot of us would wish to have parents like this that would never give up on you and eventually are the reason that your case was solved. So good for them for being such amazing parents for Jacob, even after his death. And that, my friends, is the disturbing, sad, and heartfelt story of the abduction and unfortunate murder of Jacob Wetterling, an 11-year-old boy from Minnesota. I am so glad that his parents have closure and finally know what happened to their son. I can't imagine going through life the way that they had, and how probably many other parents had to go through life wondering what happened to their children. No one should ever have to go through this, and my heart goes out to the Wetterlings and anyone else who has suffered the loss of a child in any capacity. I think that is by far the worst thing that can ever happen to a person. And I'm not trying to downplay the hurt or the suffering of when it comes to people losing their loved ones. It's absolutely awful and heartbreaking, and I'm just so sorry. I just feel deep down in my soul, and this is just my opinion as a mother, but the thought of losing any of my boys is enough pain to make a person physically ill. I just cannot imagine. Thank you, bestie, for putting me through the tears and heartbreak this story did, but I am also glad that I got to know the story. I had heard parts of it before, but never the ending, and I had no idea about the sick, twisted turd that is now in prison for this. I hope he never gets out. I hope he wakes up every day and gets the shit kicked out of him on a daily basis and is just living the most miserable life in prison. He deserves it. If you guys have a case that you would like to suggest, please reach out. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, or you can submit the little form that I made on the website, thekillfile.com. While you're there, follow us on any social media platforms. The links are on the website. Also, share us with your friends and family so the true crime lovers in your life can find us and listen and follow along. You can also subscribe or follow along on YouTube, Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Samsung Podcasts, Deezer, Pandora, Stitch, and more. I am everywhere. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I will see you guys next week for another case of The Kill File. Bye! Well, that's it for today, guys. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today and listening to another episode of The Kill File. If you want to share your thoughts on what we covered today, suggest a case for me to check out, or if you're just bored and looking for something to do, you can head over to The Kill File's social medias and reach out. We're on Facebook and Instagram as The Kill File, and we're on YouTube and TikTok as The Kill File Podcast. Also, feel free to check out our website at thekillfile.com, where you can learn more about me, your host, and a little bit more about how The Kill File got started. I love hearing from you guys. Come back on Mondays, wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, when we will cover another case on The Kill File, where nothing stays buried forever. Stay safe, you guys. Bye!